So crop insurance, after we get to that final planting date, starts to go down.
Yes, so our final planting date in Illinois for most of the state for corn is June 5th, May 31st for the extreme southern counties in this state. But once we reach that date, we begin to reduce the crop insurance guarantee. So if you have an RP guarantee and it originally starts out at, say, $600 per acre, every day after the final planting date, you reduce it 1%. So 1% down 1% the first day, another 2% or 2% the second day, 3% the third day, and so on. That continues throughout the late planting period, which in Illinois is 20 days. After you get to the end of that, the guarantee is 60% of the original guarantee.
So what if you? Oh, right. So if I plant my corn on June 4,
You got the full guarantee on June 4.
and on June 5 I have the full guarantee.
And on June 6th, it's down 1%. June 7th, it's down 2%.
But
June
how
8th.
do they know what day I planted the
So,
corn?
so you're going to have to report the day, the the acres that you planted by date after the late plant or the final planting date, and then they'll use that to calculate your guarantee. So if you have so let's say you have 100 acres of insurable corn. If you plant 50 acres of it before June 5th, you'll have the full guarantee. If you plant it 10 days after the guarantee, that'll be reduced 20%, so you'll average the two together, and that will be your guarantee.
So it, it's just another complicating factor for the prevent plant decision.
Yeah, so when we reach that final planting date, um, your guarantee will go down. Obviously, the risk then goes up. So once we get to that final planting date, you can either take the known. The known would be the preventive planting payment, which isn't going to change. It's going to be 55% of your revenue guarantee, which will be $4 projected price times your trend adjusted APH yield times your coverage level, and then take 55% of that. You'll either have that known or you'll have to make the decision to keep planting corn and weigh whether the expected return from corn exceeds that known preventive planting payment.
Oh, there's where I have things hooked up wrong because I, for some reason, thought if you went, say, June 10 and said I'm taking prevent plant, that they would adjust your prevent plant payment
No,
by the 1% per day down. You
no,
get the whole prevent plant payment, but if you plant on that day, you don't get all of the crop insurance payment.
you don't get the crop, and your revenue guarantee continues to decline. It really reduces the incentives to plant after the preventive planting date. So, it's sort of from a risk management standpoint, it makes that taking that preventive planting payment more or less risky, actually.
You also write in the article that MFP creates a problem.
So last year, MFP, uh, Market Facilitation Program payments, were based on bushels produced. We had a $1.65 payment on soybeans per bushel and 1 cent on corn. So if we reach that final planting date for corn, you can either take the preventive planting payment, plant corn, or actually can't plant soybeans. And so when we're planting soybeans, you should be using the market price for determining the return to that land. If you're expecting another market facilitation program payment and it's based on bushels, you would add $1.60 if it's the same as last year. Hopefully, USDA will clear all of this up and announce what they're doing with MFP before we have to really make those fine or preventive planting payments, which would mean they'd have to release the program here this coming week. Because we really do need to know what those payment rates are to make good decisions. Maybe they'll decouple it and base it on last year's acres and last year's yields, but that's purely speculation on my part. I think USDA does know that if they announce an MFP program based on 2019 production, that they're going to have an influence on planning and preventive planning payments.
Or even if they were to release it in, and it was based on APH, I would think.
Yeah, so APH, you could base it on APH. The big thing that they have to decouple if they really want to not influence decision is have it based on acres planted in 2019. If you would base it on acres planted in 2018, then what you planted in 2019 would not be influencing decisions or influencing decisions as much. So decoupling the acres is pretty key if they want to not influence planning decisions. They give various officials at USDA say that they do not want to influence those decisions, but if they don't want to influence those decisions, they're going to have to change the program and make it different from 2018. Again, they would have to announce those decisions here fairly shortly, because even the expectation of it could influence some people to keep planting, for example, soybeans.
Now, about the prevent plant decision.
Mm-hmm.
How does it play out in Illinois? What do farmers need to know?
So, preventive planting payments. So, calculating the preventive planting payment is really easy. What you need, or it's 55% of your revenue guarantee. What you really should figure out, or have your crop insurance specialist figure out, is how many acres are eligible for preventive planting payments on corn for each one of your insurable units. If that happens to be 60 acres, for example, let's say, and you plant 50, you could take 10 acres of preventive planting on corn. So getting that number down would be a good thing, along with the preventive planting payment. Then you would compare that to what you expect returns to be for both corn and probably soybean. My calculations would say that we have to have a price increase to get corn acres in, or to keep. Once we get to the preventive planting payment date, we need price increases to get corn acres. And something north of $4 per bushel is probably needed, and maybe much more than that to get corn acres after that preventive planting date, because we will likely have yield declines. So to equal what we get from that preventive planting payment, we need some higher prices than we currently have.
And that's higher. North of $4 cash.
Yes, that's right. North of $4 cash. Because remember, we got to have, we get a $4 our projected price is $4, so that's what we're going to base our preventive planting payment on. We got to get $4. We're going to sell those bushels for something, so we have to have $4 in cash in a lot of cases. That will depend on how much of the cost you can avoid by not planting. Many farmers can avoid a lot of those because they unfortunately haven't had the opportunity to do much field work. But if we put on, for example, nitrogen fertilizer, we wouldn't want to include that in our calculations of returns because it's already out there. We can't do anything about it. So we wouldn't add that cost to planting corn in a late planting situation.
Is that it?
Take a look at the soybeans as well. Although soybeans have gotten lower priced, it's going to be we're going to have to watch markets closely. If you take the preventive planting corn, you might want to buy some calls as a way of protecting some upside. If you plant corn and soybeans, you might want to protect your downside. Of course, this year that's going to be uh, difficult because what the yield is going to be kind of hard to estimate. Um, so taking some protection once you get those on the marketing side might be a good thing to do.
Couple of other things. This decision has no bearing on ARC and PLC.
No bearing on ARC and PLC. What it will not impact your payments from ARC and PLC. You will be making those decisions later. Obviously, what happens planning-wise will influence 2019 prices and yields. So, in a sense, they're influenced, but nothing you do on your farm will influence them. The big thing that these decisions that you're making now could influence are the market facilitation program payments. Again, all we know is that USDA is considering releasing something. So we don't know what those levels are, what the structure would look like, whether it's going to be the same as this year as last year. So that's one of the big unknowns this year.
If you have an area product, it's different.
So area products are not they don't have preventive planning payments in them. So if you get an area product, you don't have preventive planning. You don't have preventive planning on margin protection, and you don't have preventive planning payments on SCO. The farmers that have high RP coverage levels will find taking the preventive planning payment more attractive. As we lower that coverage level, the payments will go down from preventive planning because it's based on the guarantee, and the guarantee goes down with the coverage level. So every farm specific, but those farms that have lower coverage levels will face more of an incentive to plant.
If you're at 80 or 85% and you took the SCO,
that doesn't. So let's say you could have taken 85% RP. The fact that you have SCO doesn't influence the guarantee, so it's not going to influence the preventive planning decision. So the only case where people may regret that now is if they took SCO and lowered their RP coverage level because you've lowered the preventive planning payment.
You also need to remember to get rid of the SCO.
So yeah, we'll be making that decision later on. You don't need to get if you
take prevent plant.
Yeah.
You still, I guess, if you take prevent plant, you still need to tell them don't want the SCO.
Yeah. Well, and there again, so we will probably have to think about through that, but that's an interesting question. SCO, if you. I don't know how SCO comes into play on preventive planting acres, and my guess, or whether you get coverage for it. I simply don't know that answer right now.